In 1984, James Cameron decided to make a movie called The Terminator. It didn't do that well when it originally came out in the cinema. It wasn't until it was released and then people just fled to it, and it had a cult following. I was surprised at this because when I saw Terminator for the first time when I was about 5 or something, I loved it. I couldn't understand why nobody would love it. Recently, I went and I watched all of the Terminator movies and the TV series as well. It's part of the franchise. I thought I'll go and watch it all. And for a franchise, the first movie was fantastically well done. Then there was a bit of time before the sequel because James Cameron was away doing other things and it hadn't got the traction that he'd wanted it to, so he just sort of left it. He'd written a sequel after he'd written the first one, and it sat there, and then people were talking to him about it, and he's like, oh, my Terminator film, I didn't realise people wanted another one. So he started to work on it a bit more. He changed the script about 6 times before he actually had Judgment Day, and then when that came out and it done what he wanted Terminator to do, it shot to the moon. It was like the biggest movie of 1991 of any genre. You had the star power of Arnold Schwarzenegger, who through the 80s had built up his career to be where it was. You had Linda Hamilton playing, at first, the damsel in distress, and then in the second one, she's just a badass. She is there to stop the Terminator. But the story had changed by then. She didn't need to stop him, it was a different one. And then between 91 and then the next one was 2003, so it was a bigger gap between the first and second and the second and the third one. But with the third one, it really did not help the franchise. It didn't get the praise that the Judgment Day got. It didn't even get the praise that the original got, because the original one, it was praised, but not to the extent that James Cameron wanted, which is why it took longer for the sequel. But then it was only 6 years before they brought out Terminator Salvation. I did not have high hopes for Terminator Salvation just because of how, I don't want to say badly, because yes, the third film, they just tried to remake Judgment Day and it didn't work because the studio saw, it was a different studio by this point, it wasn't James Cameron, the rights had been sold, there's all sorts of weird production things that have happened with the rights to Terminator in itself. I mean, when I was watching the films, I was looking up about the rights, and every single time there's a new film, it's new people that own the rights. Terminator Salvation done things that Terminator 3 should have done. Continued the story, but it showed the future. We'd seen bits of the future here and there in the first 2 films. In Terminator 3, it was essentially just a remake of Terminator 2, and it didn't work properly. Then we get to Terminator Salvation. It sort of brought people back to the franchise. It made people want to go back and watch the others. While looking up, I found out that Terminator Salvation was supposed to be its own trilogy, but again, the rights changed hands, people weren't involved anymore, and then we got Terminator Genesis in 2015, which stripped everything back, added things in that weren't needed. There was so much convolution in the story, the going back in time and changing things. They're just trying to retcon everything that they'd done previously so that they could just take all that out. So essentially, that wiped out the events of the last 4 films, including Salvation, which was set in the future. But with this happening, these things aren't going to happen. But then we get to Terminator Dark Fate. Again, retcons things from the last film, which changed the entire history. This goes back and wipes out the events of Genesis, Salvation, Rise of the Machines. It continues from Judgment Day, but again, it didn't do what they wanted it to do. All these films made their money back, the companies that were making them at the time, they all had their own issues, bankruptcies, companies shutting down, other things. There's so much to look at through this franchise. I think, personally, this is a franchise that's run its course. We've had 3 good films, 1 okay film, and 2 films that aren't really worth watching. I'll talk a wee bit about the series. From memory, it picks up after Terminator 2, and it's Sarah and John continuing on their lives, taking out Terminators that are coming to kill them, and things like that. And it wipes out Terminator 3 because it's essentially, it runs concurrently at the same time. Everything gets thrown out the window for the movies to come back out. I didn't think the series was needed. I didn't really enjoy it that much. It's not to say that it wasn't done well. It was done a lot better than the bad movies of the franchise. It told a story. It had a great cast. That's one thing I can't really fault with the casting of the films. They all had a terrific cast, but it was the storytelling that I just didn't enjoy for the later films. Whereas with this, the storytelling was there, the cast was there, but it was just like, I'm not getting drawn in. I could see what they were trying to do, I could see them trying to push certain stories, but it just didn't work. And to their credit, they said, no, that's it, we've done. It was open-ended, they could have came back, but they didn't. As a franchise, overall, I would probably say that because there have been more misses than hits, it has to be a 3 out of 5. If I had to go through each film, Terminator is a 4. I would have given it a 5, but just because of things that I've seen round about that same time where the stories were a lot better, the characters were more driven, there wasn't things to pull you away. With this, there was things that sort of pulled you out of the story for a bit. But as you go on to the second film, it brings you back, and it's like, alright, so that's why that happened. Judgment Day is 5 every day. And when people talk about Terminator films, it's like Terminator 2 is the one that you go to if you're going to just sit and watch a Terminator film. Rise of the Machines, I'll begrudgingly give it a 1. I could see what they were trying to do. They tried to remake Judgment Day. It didn't work. They could have done so many more things, even though they were trying to copy what they had done previously, but they didn't. Terminator Salvation, I'll give that a 3. Terminator Salvation tried to save the franchise because they'd saw how far it had dropped just by one film, that it changed the entirety of the franchise and where it was going. They tried to bring that back, and it worked to an extent. If they had managed to continue with Terminator Salvation, if it had been the trilogy that it was supposed to be, I think that could have been helpful to the franchise. Terminator Genesis, I'm going to give this a 1. It just completely undone everything that Salvation had built up to bring it back, and there was things that weren't needed. They retconned the entire franchise from the first movie. They changed everything, and that for me made it not viable to be in this franchise. It wasn't needed at all. Terminator Dark Fate, I'll give this a 2 just because it wipes out everything from Terminator 3 onwards. So that's my overall thoughts on all the films. With the Sarah Jane Chronicles, I'll give that a 2. I mean, if you want to go and watch it, it's fairly enjoyable. It's not like terrible. I wouldn't say that any of the Terminator films are not worth watching. Give them a watch once, see how you feel. If it's not for you, fair enough. I will leave you with this thought. James Cameron has said that he is in the process of writing a new Terminator script. Take that how you will. Arnold Schwarzenegger has said he is done with Terminator, just because of how the last few were written and done. And as we know, the Terminator is one of these characters that will live on as Arnold Schwarzenegger. There's nobody else that we want to play the Terminator. He is the Terminator and always will be the Terminator. Let me know what you think. If you are fans of the Terminator, let me know. I always love having a chat about movies. And see ya.